Welcome to The Sacred Life. I'm your host, Aaron Beachy, coming to you from Higher Ground Fellowship in Kokomo, Indiana. And today we bring to you another episode of Ancient Insights. And joining us today is John Baylor and his commentary. And David will be sharing with us the Ancient Insights today. David, where will we be gleaning these ancient insights from today?
All right, so we are reading from the Theologia Germanica, which is a mid-14th century, I guess you would call it a devotional writing, kind of meditation and reflection on Christianity. And it was written, like I said, in the mid-14th century, thought to have been written by a priest of the Teutonic order, of all people. So, interesting origins, very influential to the Anabaptists, to the Protestants, and generally to late medieval Christians in the German-speaking world. It's a very good book. So anyway, I think with that we will get started.
All right.
Starting in chapter 3, how man's fall and going astray must be amended as Adam's fall was. What else did Adam do but the same thing? It is said it was because Adam ate the apple that he was lost or fell. I say it was because of his claiming something for his own, and because of his I, mine, me, and the like. Had he eaten 7 apples, and yet never claimed anything for his own, he would not have fallen. But as soon as he called something his own, he fell, and would have fallen if he had never touched an apple. Behold, I have fallen 100 times more often and deeply, and gone 100 times farther astray than Adam, and not all mankind could amend this fall, or bring him back from going astray. But how shall my fall be amended? It must be healed as Adam's fall was healed, and on the selfsame way. By whom and on what way was that healing brought to pass? Mark this, man could not without God, and God should not without man. Therefore God took human nature or manhood upon himself, and was made man, and man was made divine. Thus the healing was brought to pass. So also must my fall be healed. I cannot do the work without God, and God may not or will not without me. For if it shall be accomplished in me too, God must be made man, in such sort that God must take to himself all that is in me, within and without, so that there may be nothing in me which strives against God or hinders his work. Now if God took to himself all men that are in the world, or ever were, and were made man in them, and they were made divine in him, and this work were not fulfilled in me, my fall and my wandering would never be amended, except it were fulfilled in me also. And in this bringing back and healing, I can or may or shall do nothing of myself, but just simply yield to God, so that he alone may do all his things in me and work, and I may suffer him and all his work and his divine will. And because I will not do so, but I count myself to be my own, and say I, mine, me, and the like, God is hindered, so that he cannot do his work in me alone and without hindrance. For this cause my fall and my going astray remain unhealed. Behold, this all comes of my claiming something for my own.
I don't have a whole lot of commentary on there. I feel like for me it speaks so clearly on its own. Maybe there are some points out here that I'm missing, but like this I, mine, and me stands out so much. Like this idea of claiming something for myself. This is what the fall is. I mean, as he recounts it, this is the fall, as Adam claiming something for himself. And I mean, it's just so simple to look and from what he says there and say, oh man, I know I'm doing this. Where is it that I'm doing this in my life? Where is it that I'm claiming something for myself?
Right. I think it's probably a little bit of a different way of looking at the fall than we might be used to. We might have a tendency to look at it in terms of the commandment that Adam broke.
Right.
The specific word of God's commandment, and that was his rebellion or his sinful act. And like he's presenting like, no, it goes much deeper than that. Like there's a reason why Adam broke God's commandment. And it's because
Yeah.
it's because he saw himself as something. He claimed something for his own and didn't recognize his lowliness before God. So like that sticks out to me. Like I think he's speaking somewhat hyperbolically here when he says, you know, Adam could have eaten however, whatever he says, 100 apples and
Only
never 7, yeah, whatever. He could have eaten 7 apples and never fallen if he'd never claimed it for his own. Like I said, like I think you have to understand that. Don't get too caught up, like in the preciseness of that. Like he's speaking. He's hyperbolically
But
pressing.
isn't it interesting? I mean, like if you tease that out, then what he's saying is, Adam could have broken that law, that commandment of God 7 times, as long as he wasn't breaking the real commandment of God.
Right. Yeah. I guess I'm just trying to make that point. Like, don't get too caught up if you don't get what he's saying there, and reject the rest of what he's saying because you disagree with the way he worded it. I really liked where should I should this part where he says God took human nature upon himself and was made man, and man was made divine, and then goes on to say, my fall must be healed the same way. I cannot do the work without God, and God may not or will not without me. For if it shall be accomplished in me too, God must be made man, in such sort that God must take to himself all that is in me, and so on. I really like the point bringing out there that, like, personalizing the incarnation of God, like saying, like, this is something that happened in the world, but also has to happen within. So it's like Christianity exists out in the literal historical event, but also is repeated within me personally. So like the incarnation has to also happen inside of me, or it's no use to me.
Right.
And like I just thought, like, wow, like that's a really good point. And if I can look, like this is definitely the way medieval people tended to look at Christianity. It's like there's the historical account, but then there's also the internal account. That's the way that this is repeated in me. And so like this is the reason why you have things like ideas about like the Virgin Mary and things like that. Is the original intention behind that goes back to this, is like there's a meaning here that has to be played out inside of you. And so like this, once you externalize those things and remove them from the internal context, then they become something that they're not.
Yeah, well, if I were to describe, especially like the medieval Germanic Christianity, like I think of it as being very incarnational.
Right.
And what incarnational means is like it's your flesh and blood.
Right. Exactly, and then that is a very good point. Like, so like in like even today, so like in America, we make a really big deal out of Christmas. We get that from German, from the Germans. Like, you probably would know, I think more about medieval England than I do, but I think generally in England, Easter is more important. And Christmas is far less important in medieval England and France. In the German-speaking world, it's like, man, Christmas is, like, not to say that Easter isn't the center of Christianity, but German culture puts a huge emphasis on the incarnation. It's like, this is something that's real, that's flesh and bones.
I don't want to get into this too much, but and maybe I've mentioned this before, this idea when people say, Christmas is great, the reason that we have Christmas is so that we could have Easter. We wouldn't have Easter if it weren't for Christmas.
Right.
And when I hear that, I'm like, the incarnation.
That's a big deal.
Yes. God became man.
Right.
That's what we should be talking about in Christmas. And again, like the idea, what does it mean for God to become man? It's like, it means that this is sacred stuff.
Right.
This lives out the will of God. That's what the incarnation means.
Yeah. Right. And so like,
God with us.
Yeah, and I'll go back to a conversation or a point I made in a previous conversation. It's like well, that idea of Christmas almost collapses into Gnosticism.
Mhm.
It's like, no, like the flesh of Christ is more than just a means to an end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Like you said, like it's a really important point that the incarnation of God sanctifies man,
Mhm.
sanctifies the flesh. It's made our flesh something holy.
Yeah. Now you had mentioned to me privately that you saw the idea of theosis in the Theologia Germanica, and it comes across in this idea as well, that God must be incarnated in me, or whatever
Yeah.
the phrase was that he used in there.
Like
This-
we'll get to that later, like not today, but later we'll get to like it's specifically.
Yeah.
It's
But
specifically
it comes across in that as well. It's like you get the sense that from just that sentence that you read there, that the aim of Christianity is that you will become like the incarnation of God, that you will
Right.
become Christ.
Yeah. And so like that's the thrust here, like God must be made man within me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, the reason for that is so that I can be joined with God.
Mm-hmm.
So I can be unified with Christ, with God. Yeah, like you said, I think the rest of it pretty, like, it's very well stated, I think very clear, his words. So much, like it all goes back to the I and the me. And just like really pointing out like the only thing that's hindering God's work in me is me. And my insistence on holding on to anything. And like it really struck me reflecting on this passage, like even my salvation isn't mine and it's not for me. And like that's something that hinders me, is thinking that my Christianity is mine, my salvation is mine, my relationship with Christ is mine. It's like, no, actually it's not. And like I need to let go of that. That's hindering the work of God. And I guess I won't explain that. I'll let you, dear listener, reflect on like what in the world is this guy saying.
Yeah, that's a good topic for another one of our dialogue episodes. But yeah, that's take note of that, because we will be talking about that in depth sometime later.
I'm going to read one more very short passage here. Chapter 4, how man, when he claims anything good for his own, falls and touches God in his honor. God says, I will not give my glory to another. This is as much as to say that praise and honor and glory belong to none but to God only. But now if I call any good thing my own, as if I were it, or of myself had power, or did or knew anything, or as if anything were mine or of me, or belonged to me, or were due to me, or the like, I take to myself somewhat of honor and glory, and do two evil things. First, I fall and go astray, as previously mentioned. Secondly, I touch God and his honor, and take to myself that what belongs to God only. For all that must be called good belongs to none but to the true eternal goodness, which is God only. And whoever takes it to himself commits unrighteousness and is against God.
It seems very much like a continuation of what we just saw,
Right.
And especially your last words right before you went back into reading this. So, what must be called good belongs to none but to the true eternal goodness, which is God. And whoever takes it to himself commits unrighteousness and is against God. And there again, like, if you're looking at something, you might argue about your own traits and say, like, this is good about me. I'm a man of great faith, or something like that, as you were mentioning. I have a great work ethic, I mean, like, I'm great at this, or I'm good at this, I'm good at this. If you're unwilling to say great when you're talking about yourself. But when you talk about all these strengths, there's this sense that you take these strengths unto yourself, and what is it that makes you differ from another? I mean,
Right.
to paraphrase Paul, It's not you that, like, something like your good work ethic didn't come from you. Something like your deep empathy that you have for other people didn't come from you. These are things that have come to you from above, and it's just arrogance to take this stuff to yourself and claim goodness as being your own.
Yeah. Mark 10:18, and Jesus said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. Matthew 19:17, and he said unto them, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But and then a little twist, Psalms 53:3. Every one of them is gone back; they are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. And then in Luke, Jesus said the same thing. Luke 18:19, and Jesus said unto him, Why callest thou me good? None is good save one, that is God.
Mm-hmm.
That was a continuing theme. You find that, I read the verse from Psalms because you find that in Psalms before Jesus would have come along. So that kind of gives us a clue that this is something that just goes beyond just the surface level of what's being said here.
Right. We're tempted as Christians often to say, like, that statement in Psalms is because they don't have Christ yet.
Right.
And in Christ we're justified, and now we're saints and we're good. But it's like, but Christ himself would not let you call him good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, who am I? Am I better than Christ? Am I more than Christ?
Yeah, I've heard people reference that passage and say that, like, that's his way of saying that he's God.
Right. Or other people
but-
saying, like, he was being clever with the Pharisees for trying to trick him.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, but the words he said are important.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it still is this idea of, like, I mean, you could say, and maybe I'm being unfair to the passage as well, because I'm incorporating this into it.
I think it's fair.
It could be this statement that, like, you are calling me good, but you need to understand that goodness is of God,
Right.
And it's not something that I take unto myself.
Right, because elsewhere Christ says, and that's what I was starting to say, is that it's fair because elsewhere Christ clarifies this, and he says that I do nothing for my own glory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do nothing for myself.
Yeah.
And I don't glorify.
And even of myself. I do what I see the Father doing.
Right, and like I also do it to the glory of the Father,
Right.
not to myself. And like, so like, who am I to say more of myself than what Christ was willing to say of himself?
Well, when the psalmist said, "They're all become filthy. There is none that doeth good." The point I flesh that out to the point he's kind of making is all this good stuff that we do is as filthiness if we try to make it our own,
right,
and make it what defines us. It's as filthiness before God. Basically, it's not worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like this is what happens when we take it to ourselves, and like it becomes an affront to God. It becomes something that is against God.
Right.
And so like, I don't know, just like reflecting on that, like how much of my faith, my Christianity, or how much of Christianity in general is actually an affront to God, because like we're taking it to ourselves. And like going back to my statement earlier, like you said, we'll sometime have a deeper conversation about that point, but it's like, I'm not saved for myself. My salvation isn't mine. It doesn't belong to me. I don't own it.
Yeah.
Like I can't take any credit for it.
Yeah.
Like we Christians have this saying, and I think most of us don't actually mean it, that the only thing that I bring to my salvation is the sin that made it necessary. It's like, that's exactly right. That is the only, like that's the only role that you have, is your unworthiness. And beyond that, it's like,
Why are you trying to become worthy?
Right. Or it's like, why am I thinking that I've really got something
Yeah.
when I've been saved? And, like, we could, I'll make this very brief. We could think ourselves to be something here, sitting here, because, we're saved, we're Christians, and we're trying to do something for Christianity, for the church. It's like that very attitude will be our downfall and will turn us into something of destruction to the church. Turn us into the very thing that we hate.
Right.
It's like you talked earlier in a previous conversation about attention, about hatred being a perverted sense of attention. It's like, ooh, there's a way in which that plays out. Like, by thinking ourselves to be something, we will become the very thing that we think we're against.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, I turn a lot of things into conversations about music, but I think I think a lot of musicians are this way, that they put on a good show, they've done a great job, and then people start showering with them with compliments, and they're like, they don't know what to do with this. Like, why are you giving me all these compliments, even though it's like, I know I just put on a really good show. I know I just, I played really well, my singing voice was great, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And there's still this feeling like there's something wrong with all these compliments that you're showering on me. And sometimes there are some musicians who will respond to that and will say, hey, all the glory goes to God. I mean, there's not tons of them, but I mean, I've certainly heard musicians that have that response. And I mean, I guess there's something very legitimate about this sense that, like, they're not necessarily saying that just because they feel like it's that, oh, this would be the proper Christian response to this. They could be saying it because they recognize, like, look, I know you're trying to compliment me, but there is a problem with trying to pay me a compliment and to say that it's me that's good.
But, like, even more so, like, there's also a problem with me accepting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I say, even though you know that, okay, I did do a good job, I am aware that this was a good performance right here.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just in my own mind trying to picture, like, okay, so what does this need to look like for me, because I get in that position where people are complimenting me, and I just don't know exactly what to do with it, and I feel like I feel like it's too righteous sounding of a thing to say all the glory goes to God. I mean, I feel like a little weird saying that, but I feel like that wouldn't be very legitimate. It would be like that in itself would be like a performance in my mind to say something like that.
Yeah, like that's something that, like, I personally struggle with, is not saying or doing good things because I see where others misuse it and do it as a performance.
Yeah, right.
And I guess I'm not always entirely sure how to deal with that.
Yeah.
But see, then I would take those comments, guys, and go back to our discussion in another previous episode of you need to wash the intent of your heart with the water, so to speak, and renew it. But you still need to do the thing that should be done.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, maybe
right.
it is, maybe you have to continually check yourself when you say, well, I give the glory to God for that praise and everything. And then you got to check yourself and see, okay, where's my heart on this?
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of a continual renewal. But I would add to that, I would just say, don't, maybe do it anyway.
Right.
Because it's what we are to do.
Yeah. I'm always very cautious about like saying something with my words that goes against what's inside of me.
Yeah.
But I guess I bring this up to say, like, okay, in my mind and in my heart, like, let's start going in this direction. When I get those compliments and I don't know exactly what to do with it, then at least start with it in here, of what does the compliment mean, And I mean, maybe for me, it would be easier to say something like, you know, every good thing comes from above.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
I mean, that to me, that doesn't sound too righteous.
Yeah.
In that sense, like I don't feel like I'm just saying the right thing, but I feel like I'm saying something that means something to another person,
Right.
and it also means something to me.
I was just thinking, like, I see a lot of reactionary theology and reactionary behavior, reactionary action among Christians and among people in general. And like I worry very much about being reactionary to things. And I think the trap that I often fall into is being reactionary against reaction.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is a good place to stop for now.
Yeah.
We thank you again for joining us for Ancient Insights, and we hope that you will again offer your comments and thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, family, anybody you know, even your enemies.
Especially your
Right. But again, we thank you for joining us again today on The Sacred Life, and we wish you peace in Christ.